Hello and welcome to Monster of the Week, the only show on YouTube that all 10 out of 10 dentists recommend watching. This is the show where we take old monsters from previous editions of D&D and other tabletop systems and convert them into 5th edition D&D so that you can use them in your current 5th edition D&D campaigns. Today, we are taking a little bit of a foray outside of our usual monster list and going into Pathfinder. That's right, Pathfinder. I'm coming for your monsters, I'm converting them to D&D, and there's nothing you can do about it. I guess you could sue me, but please don't do that. Seriously, I was kidding. Don't sue me. But why would dentists recommend watching this show? Well, I'm going to tell you right now, because today we are talking about the Tooth Fairy. The Tooth Fairy, like the thing that comes in and takes your teeth as a child after your child's teeth falls out and leaves you with a loonie. That's what we call a dollar in Canada, because our money has a loon on it, and apparently we like projecting to the rest of the world that we're a cartoon country. But yes, I have acquired many a loonie in my day for losing my teeth. And the Tooth Fairy doesn't really seem like something that Dungeons and Dragons necessarily wants, needs, or cares about. But the Pathfinder Tooth Fairy is a whole different beast. These creatures are not your benevolent little fairies that come in and leave you with a loonie and take away your child teeth. These creatures come in with pliers in a swarm and will gouge the teeth out of every living thing around them if they can get their dirty little teeth-stealing paws on them. So as I mentioned, the Tooth Fairy comes to us from Pathfinder, and the reason I chose to cover this monster is because it is so fun and whimsical, which is always a good time if the monster is done properly, and it's also a fae creature, and anyone who watches this channel regularly will know how much I love fae monsters. But the biggest reason I chose to cover this monster is because they're just straight up creepy and very unsettling to look at, and that will get you pretty far with me. So as always, today we're going to talk about just exactly what this monster can do in combat and what its mechanics are and how I would build an encounter with the Tooth Fairy as a monster. And then we're going to go over some plot hooks and new ideas and cover a few different concepts for how you might actually employ the Tooth Fairy in your game, connecting it to the story. If you don't play Pathfinder, but you do play D&D 5th edition, as I mentioned, there is a link to a stat block conversion, which you can find in the description below. So feel free to open that up and follow along as we go over this creature's stat block, or simply close your eyes, lean back, and try not to fall asleep, because the Tooth Fairies are coming and they will rip out all of your teeth and have a great time doing it. So let's talk about some. This is one of the first times in a while that I've covered a creature with a CR this low. The Tooth Fairy clocks in at a CR 1/2, which puts them on a pretty basic level of difficulty in terms of what they can actually do. The reason I don't often cover monsters of this low CR threshold is because monsters of anything below CR2 are often very weak, and they often don't have many new and interesting abilities. That's okay, we need monsters like that, but because I always try to convert creatures that offer us a new type of monster, something we don't already have in 5th edition D&D, it's very rare that I will convert something of this lowest CR, because often those monsters are just very simple and basic and kind of meant to get you into the first tier of play. But there are exceptions, and the Tooth Fairy is one such exception. See, this monster is wild. They are only CR 1/2, but they have a 60-foot fly speed, which right off the bat means that they are extraordinarily mobile. But it's what they do with that fly speed that counts. And what do they do? Well, they steal teeth. These monsters only have one attack action, and it is literally called pliers, because these creatures all have magical pliers that they go around with, and they ply them to great effect, ripping out the teeth of their victims and causing damage. If they're able to connect with one of their plier attacks, the target has one of their teeth ripped out, and the Tooth Fairy is going to try to make off with that tooth. Until that creature can get that tooth back, they have disadvantage on persuasion checks because they just have a mouthful of missing teeth potentially now. That's very fun and silly and is exactly the level of shenanigans that you kind of want to see in a D&D game. If the person who's had their tooth stolen is actually able to get that tooth back, pop it back in their mouth, and are then subjected to any magical healing effect, the tooth will grow back into the socket from which it was taken. So it's not necessarily permanent unless you know, they can't get the teeth back, in which case you're hooped. Continuing the Guillermo del Toro-esque tradition of taking normal things and making them creepy and fucking weird for no reason, they also have an action called sleep, which does exactly what you think it does. They roll 2d6 and add up that number, and then any creature within 15 feet of them that has a hit point total fewer than the number rolled on those 2d6 gets put to sleep. At higher levels, this is irrelevant, but we're talking about a CR 1/2 creature, so that's going to likely put to sleep most commoners and most PCs if they've taken a hit or two, in some cases even if they're at max hit points. So as you can imagine, their modus operandi is to knock people unconscious, use their pliers to rip out their teeth, and then just fuck off back to their tooth-riddled den. And as if all of that wasn't terrible and gross enough, there is one final trick up their sleeve, which I guess isn't really up their sleeve and is just kind of in their body. When a tooth fairy dies, a barbarian's hammer comes down and smashes it to dust, a paladin's sword skewers it through the air, a fireball fireballs it, whatever the case may be. It explodes, not into pixie dust, but into plaque dust. That's right, when the tooth fairy dies, it creates an explosion where everything within 5 feet of it has to make a dexterity save. If they fail, they are coated in a disgusting, foul-smelling, putrid dust comprised of tooth fairy plaque. This poisons those creatures, and until they're able to take 10 minutes to wash it off using water, they're poisoned. Just potentially indefinitely. I guess as long as you've got gross plaque on you, you're gonna be gross and plaquey. That's what it boils down to, as you should be. And that pretty neatly sums up mechanically what the Tooth Fairy monster is capable of doing. It's a lot for a CR 1/2 creature, and while they'll pretty easily be dispatched by most D&D parties, in great numbers, they can be pretty dang threatening. So now that we have an understanding of just exactly what they can do, let's move along and talk about why they do those things. Because, I mean, why do they do that? Why do they do that? Why do they do that? So the reason that they do that is because they're obsessed with stealing teeth. Why are they obsessed with stealing teeth? Fuck if I know, but that's just what they do. They're fae. That's the great thing about fae creatures, is they're basically weird aliens. So you need to provide very little context and very little motivation for why any fae creature does what it does ever. Tooth fairies steal teeth because that's what they do. There is text in the lore to suggest that tooth fairies actually require teeth to propagate their species, because why would that not be the case? They yoink teeth out, bury them in the ground, and within a day or so, new tooth fairies will spawn from those stolen teeth, I guess, because sure. There's a staggering amount of lore about these creatures in Pathfinder, which is part of the reason why I love Pathfinder monsters so much, because they'll just find the most random, minuscule fuck-off monster and be like, oh yeah, we're gonna write 4 pages of lore for this, like, ceiling mold or whatever. And the Tooth Fairy is no exception. One of the things that I really thought was fascinating about the Tooth Fairy in Pathfinder, and now in D&D 5th edition, is that they kind of live in these colonies where they decorate their houses with stolen teeth. And what they do is they go out at night and they put together like these little raiding parties where they go in and they knock out a group of townsfolk who are sleeping in their bed, and then they use their pliers to take their teeth right out and then carry all the teeth that they can carry back home. As I mentioned, they need them to propagate their species, because of course they do, and they also need them to decorate their homes, because they're not just satisfied with a home full of IKEA furniture. They've got to have fucking teeth on top of everything too, so good for them. They know what they like and they're going after it. But also, tooth fairies in the Pathfinder world are born without teeth. They are completely toothless when they are born, so all those teeth you see in their mouths, which is where teeth usually go, are stolen from other humanoid creatures, and then they use them to, I guess, have teeth. They use them to have their own teeth. I don't know. That's one of the other things they do with it. They also love rare and unique teeth. So maybe they live nearby a settlement that's filled with humans, and then a half-orc traveler is coming to the inn like, oh, those are different teeth than what we're used to. That's fascinating. Let's try to get those canines. Let's get those fangs. Those teeth will be highly prized and either used to fashion some type of trophy or used to fashion some type of powerful tooth-based gear, I guess. I would love to see what these guys think about elephant tusks. Something else the book goes as far as to mention for some reason is that they are obsessed with gold teeth too. So if they're able to get their hands on a golden tooth, they will be very happy and very proud of that find. That's like the highest form of treasure, is golden teeth or teeth with like gems set in them. Any type of teeth that would be ornate even by like human standards. You'd even mention some of them using golden teeth as crowns, which, like, think I don't fucking see what you're doing? I see what you're doing. Crowns, like, I get it. I get the pun. I don't like it, but I will allow it. So these tooth fairies will wear crowns when they can steal them from people, both literal stolen crowns and other teeth that they use as crowns because everything is terrible. So that's already probably starting to get the creative juices flowing and making you imagine all types of nightmare scenarios in which a gang of tooth fairies could be used against a party or something that the party cares about. But for something a little bit lighter, I like to imagine that you could have a small, peaceful colony of tooth fairies that maybe have an agreement with a local dentist. And that dentist says, you know what, you can keep all the teeth you want, just help me get the teeth out of the people who need teeth removed from them, and then the teeth are yours to keep. How does that sound? I would love to go to a medieval dentist that's being operated by little tooth fairies, and then whoever's keeping them in line, making sure they don't take out more teeth than they're supposed to. I see you back there trying to sneak that molar. Get out of here. Get out of here. Also, I'm sure many of you have seen that picture, which has been floating around since forever, of the, like, tooth fairy meme. I don't know what exactly to call it, but there's just like this picture that says, little did you know, tooth fairies are the less violent and smaller subspecies of the larger bone fairies. And it's like, whoa, that's creepy. Haha, imagine that. Well, I propose that you make that nightmare a reality. You don't even need a new stat block for that. We already have a creature called the Bone Devil. Make that a fae. Now you have a bone fairy, and give it a bunch of tooth fairy minions and get them to go and just fucking ruin someone's day, I guess. I don't imagine them doing anything other than just causing mass pandemonium. So yeah, get them to do that. I want to see a D&D campaign from one of you guys where the party has to go take down a bone fairy and a bunch of its tooth fairy minions that have stolen all of the teeth from an entire city, or like a small town where just everyone is toothless now and the party has to go and get all the teeth back. It's disgusting. If you wanted to make this whole bone tooth fairy multiverse thing a reality, you could even have a player who is a warlock pact of the great archfey who has a bone fairy as their patron, and like a little tooth fairy familiar, a little teeth fairies come to visit or whatever. It's just awful. All of this is awful. I regret doing this fucking video so bad. Tooth fairies are miserable, and I highly suggest you employ them in your game if you want something that's a little bit whimsical and a little bit silly, but also has a bend of terror, because you can play the tooth fairy as like, haha, it's so funny, it's the tooth fairy, but it's a monster. And you can also play them off as nightmare creatures from the abyss here to rip bones out of your fucking mouth. But whichever path you choose, there is a stat block in the description below. So if you are not playing Pathfinder and you are playing D&D 5th edition and you want to use these monsters, all the info you need is right there. It's in the form of a Google document organized very well by yours truly, if I may say so myself. And for those of you who are my lovely patrons, on the Patreon page, you can find the Tooth Fairy 5th edition Monster Manual style stat block with the lore and the actual stat block and like a little quote thing that I made up and all that cool stuff. So it kind of gives you something neat to stick in your DM folder. Because there is just something so special and unique about that moment when you're describing a monster to your players and then you show them the artwork and they all go, oh god, it's what? Anyways, I have nothing else to say about these monsters. They're disgusting. They're awful. Please use them. They're so fun. If you have any creatures that you would like to see show up on this channel, please leave a comment down below and let me know what monsters you'd like me to cover, because the list of recommendations is always growing and we're getting through it eventually. And even if you don't have a recommendation, tell me about a time that you've used this monster or times that you have in the future where you plan on using this monster. That's how words work. Mostly, just please like and leave a comment, because YouTube's algorithm is a monster of its own, and I am not nearly high enough level to challenge its CR. But thank you so much for watching. I do appreciate it, and I will catch you guys in the next one, and I promise the next video will be 99% less horrifying. I don't actually know what monster we're doing after this one at the time of recording, so I can't promise that, but it's not going to be this.